So my earliest memories of my dad and Waylon knowing each other were probably the early 80s. Now, they had met before because they had started working together around, I believe, 77 and 78. At that time, I was 3 years old, so I didn't remember them actually meeting each other very well. But once we moved to Nashville in 1982, they were best friends. And so we would go to his house for Thanksgiving. We would go over and watch all of the Dallas Cowboys games. I remember Shooter being a small child and having, always banging on this drum set and always having toys before they came out. That was always, in my opinion, the best part about going to Waylon's house when I was young was like, this Transformer isn't even out yet. This He-Man figure does not exist, Shooter. How do you have this? And, Waylon had the connections to get him all the toys first. So my dad and Waylon, they were friends like two grown children. So they would sometimes get, mad at each other over, very silly things. And then, well, I'm not going to call him till he calls me and apologizes. And, they had that kind of relationship, which was really funny. So one time, my dad, Waylon, decided to gift my dad this old Jaguar. It was a nice, old convertible Jaguar, and brought it to the house, delivered it. And my dad didn't really drive cars. He always drove trucks or higher up cars. It kind of made him sick being that low to the ground. It kind of made him nauseous, and he just didn't really like it. So he never drove the Jaguar, and the battery went dead. And so he was like, I'm going to give it back to Waylon. And so he had it towed back to to Waylon's house and dropped it off. And Waylon was furious. He was so pissed. They didn't talk for 6 months or longer, canceled some things they were supposed to do together all over this car that Waylon was giving my dad. My dad didn't want to drive it. And then it turned into them having a spat, two kids. So there were a lot of things like that were really funny.
Did your dad have a volatile personality at all?
No, not really. He was very laid back, and he didn't like to self-promote, and he didn't like to talk a lot. He would do interviews, and he was, very kind and whatnot, but he preferred to just sum things up in very few words. I would tell him a long story about something, and he'd be like, do what it want. And that would be it. And I was like, yeah, okay, that was an example of someone doing what they wanted to do. So do what it want. When they finally made up, I have no idea. If I were to guess, I would say that my mom and Jesse got together and made it happen somehow, probably tricked them both into going to dinner somewhere, and the other one was there, and, they worked it out.
Who would be at the house when you go over there for Thanksgiving? Who else would be there?
It wasn't really a large gathering of famous people or anything. I remember it being more Waylon's family, really. Jesse, and then he had a son, Buddy, who would be there, and he had a daughter, Jennifer, or Jesse's daughter, Jennifer, would be there, and Shooter, of course, and just a lot of extended family members, that were always around. So they became friends first. Somehow Waylon got connected with my dad through some time. He was spending time in Memphis, and I'm not even sure who made that initial connection. But they started hanging out as friends, but as musical friends, right? They started collaborating together as soon as they met, and writing together and spending time together. And then Waylon wanted my dad to go out on the road with him and open the show. And so my dad would, but my dad really did not like to tour that much. He enjoyed playing the shows, right? But he didn't enjoy touring. And so in those days with Waylon, it was a bus and, wild times. And so Waylon actually jokes about this in an interview where he's saying that Tony Joe was lazy, is what he said. He said, Tony Joe was lazy. We would go out on the road, and we would come back home, and he would call me and say, I'm not going back out. Like, I'm tired. This is too much. So, they started touring together, and then I think my dad like didn't really want to tour as much, and so they were just kind of friends and continued collaborating musically all the time. I mean, that's when they hung out, like, be like, Waylon, you want to go down to the studio and mess around? And so, like, a lot of these tapes I have here at my office are, unreleased sessions of my dad and Waylon just messing around in the studio together with no one else around. I don't really remember Waylon having a guitar and having it out playing around us. I think usually when they were doing something together musically, they would go to the studio. They wouldn't just sit around, and play like they were putting on a show for everybody. They kind of kept it to themselves, I think, and they would sneak off and, go do what they wanted to do.
When did they start writing together?
It's a good question. I guess around 1980. The one song, which is called Cowboy Singer, which Waylon had initially released as the full name, So You Want to Be a Cowboy Singer, which featured my dad on that as well. He originally released that in like 81 or 82, and so it must have been around that time, probably 1980, 1979.
I heard it on Outlaw Country a couple times this week, Sirius XM, and
so we released the Tony Joe version that we had in our studio, which had never been released. So we put that on the album, The Real Thing, which was initially released in 1980, but it was only 8 songs, but it had some Waylon things on it. So it had Redneck Women, which featured Waylon. It had Mamas Don't Let Your Cowboys Grow Up to Be Babies, which featured Waylon. So I found some other like lost tapes from around that time of my dad and Waylon, recording together. Not sure where it was or exactly when it was, but it was great songs, solid quality, and it fit right in with the rest of the songs that were on The Real Thing. So we just made this expanded version. My dad was really not someone who wanted to like look back on old recordings that much. Like, he just wanted to make something new. So once he was done with it, if we didn't release it right away, it was like, okay, just put it to the side and whatever. And so, sometimes he would say, yeah, there's a lot of good songs in there, but, he would never really want to take the time to like dig through and listen and see what all we really had. And so after he passed away, my job changed from what do you want to do next to what did you leave behind? And so I went into his storage unit and just started like unboxing stuff, and it just went on and on and on, and it's still going, just like boxes of reel-to-reels, dating all the way back to like 1965, where he had recorded something on his back porch, mailed a copy to himself to copyright it. And so on something like that, I have the postmark date still on there, and it's amazing because things like that I take to Welcome to 1976, and they transfer the very like brittle, high quality recordings that I'm just a little worried about touching. And so they transfer these things, and it sounds like it was recorded yesterday. Like it's really amazing. And so, that's part of the beauty is rolling all these things out, figuring out how to group them together, how to time them so that they feed off of each other, and it's not just, okay, here's a bunch of Tony Joe stuff, and it all gets lost. Like, treating each thing separately, because, he was prolific. Like, he never stopped making music, and he always had access to a studio, so it's a lot of music. I didn't really feel pressure at first because I didn't really know what was there, right? But now is like, okay, as I'm unboxing all this stuff, the only pressure is like, well, I have to get all of this out before I'm gone, because there's literally that much music that he left behind in, various forms, whether it's on DATs, whether it's on reel-to-reels, whether it's, live recordings, just figuring out, let's get everything out there so everyone can hear it. I don't know if you show stuff on your thing, but I have some things here I could show you that happen to be just sitting right here. Here we have, this is from 1967. where my dad was still, 1967, my dad was still in Corpus Christi. You can see here his address. And it's a song called Monday Morning in the Cotton Patch, which all it said was Monday morning on the back. And so we've been able to transfer this and hear it, which is really amazing.
This is some sort of small personal tape recorder.
So it was a small reel-to-reel, which I asked my mom about that, and she said he had purchased a 4-track Curtis Mathis reel-to-reel, set it up on the back porch at their house in Corpus Christi and recorded. So I have like a decent chunk of songs recorded at that time. Here's another one that's really cool. He recorded The Migrant and attempted to mail it to Johnny Cash in Hendersonville, Tennessee. It looks like this was also 1968, I believe. But pretty cool seeing the old postage stamps on there. And you know, something that I learned, something that I learned while transferring these really old tapes was like I listened to it and my dad's voice was so high, and so I played it for my mom. I'm like, why was he singing like Elvis? She was like, oh, that was before he had his tonsils taken out. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, he had his tonsils taken out in like 1967 or something, and his voice got deeper. And then that was right before Polk South and everything happened. So he became known for having this deep voice, but you know, he was singing much higher before. Shooter and I did something for Outlaw Country for Electric Rodeo, his show, a couple of weeks ago. And it was really funny because Shooter was talking about our dads being best friends and growing up together, and how like I made him watch scary movies and stuff because he was probably 5 or 6 years younger than me. And so like I just kind of wrecked him mentally at a very young age while our dads were hanging out and making music and our moms were doing whatever they were doing. But you know, it's fun. And Shooter and I talked about that as well and had a good laugh.
When you say scary movies, what particular?
So the one that I remember showing him was Silver Bullet, the Stephen King werewolf movie, and Friday the 13th and some of those. He said that I made him watch like Faces of Death and some of the really terrible things. I don't recall that, but I guess, you know, stories that long ago, it depends who you ask.
When Waylon's health started going down, was your dad in touch with him then?
Yeah, I do remember that. I specifically remember being at Thanksgiving dinner one time, and everybody had gotten up from the table, and I was probably 8th grade, a freshman in high school, around that age. And he was, at that point, he was having to be in a wheelchair most of the time. He was having to wear like ice and toner style gloves because, you know, your extremities, your fingers are cold and whatnot. And he said to me, he was like, Jody, if anybody ever tells you they got drunk with Waylon Jennings, he's like, they're full of shit. I was like, really? He's like, I could probably count on both hands how many times I was drunk. He was like, but back in those days, we were doing a lot of pills and other stuff. He was like, stay away from that. He's like, that's the reason why I'm having to wear these gloves and sit in this wheelchair. So I was like, okay. So if anybody ever tells you they got drunk with Waylon, they're full of shit.
The schedules that they had to deal with back then, I don't think people think about how crazy travel must have been. And then the doctors prescribing, I think in Waylon's book, he said LA turnarounds and the great speckled birds, what they would call these different pills, but they were prescribed these by doctors. And did your dad ever get into any of that?
No, he was not into pills and drugs. He was just really, he liked to drink beer and wine, and you know, he smoked cigarettes some. That was about it. He didn't like weed. He didn't do cocaine. He never got any of the hard drugs or anything like that. He, you know, he just wasn't that he was against other people doing it. He just wasn't for him.
Yeah. I think that had to make touring even harder, to not have the stimulants that everyone around you had.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that was probably part of it being difficult. So there's a guy, Tom Burke, who was Waylon's tour manager for many, many years, and knew my dad very well. And so I got to spend some time with Tom right when I graduated college, because Tom was tour managing for J.J. Cale, and I went to work merch for the J.J. Cale tour just because I wanted to be around J.J. Cale. And so spending a lot of time with Tom, he was telling me stories about, being on the road with Waylon, and he told me, he was like, Jody, he was like, we really believed we were outlaws. He was like, we had a tour bus. We hadn't been to sleep for 3 or 4 days. He's like, we had Hell's Angels as bodyguards riding on the bus with us. He was like, we would get out of the bus. There'd be all these fans. He's like, we would push through. The Hell's Angels would be, hitting them with canes and stuff. And then we would work our way to the stage, put on a sloppy, half-ass show. The crowd would be mad. We'd go back through the promoters, it was just total chaos. And then they were on to the next city. He was like, that was how we toured. I was like, that is just unbelievable. He was like, we were in this mindset that we were outlaws. We had long hair and Hell's Angels and cowboy hats and all that. He was like, it was crazy. Wow. The last memory I have is the one I shared earlier, speaking to him at Thanksgiving. I believe he had moved out to Arizona later on in his life because of the dry climate and whatnot. I think was better, and the hospitals and whatever kind of treatment he was having. He spent a lot of time out there. So I don't really recall seeing him, towards the very end. I think I just heard about it, online or something. It was early 2000s, so I would guess at that time I was probably, on a computer somewhere and heard about it. I think this was before phone alerts were coming through, but we did have the internet, so or else hearing it on the news, maybe it came up on the screen, but yeah.
Was your dad able to go to his funeral?
I don't think he went to I think he was out of town, either in Australia or Europe during the funeral. But he, my dad, the way he was, he would have said his goodbyes to Waylon in his own way, rather than being part of a large forefront at a large public gathering. You know what I mean? I think that would, in his mind, that would be kind of the wrong way to celebrate someone's loss. And not that it is. It's just saying in his mind, he just likes to have those things private. The most interesting thing with my dad and Waylon, and the reason that they were friends, is the mutual respect they had for each other. I think Waylon looked at my dad as like, wow, this guy's so talented, he played guitar so well, and he writes all these amazing songs, and he can sing. And my dad looked at Waylon and was like, wow, this guy is just, the forefront country outlaw, cool, touring guy with so much, personality and swagger that comes across in everything he does. And so I think that was always in the back of each other's minds when they spent time together, is that they always really wanted to be friends with the other one, even if the other one was, an asshole from time to time. They would get past it because they thought the other one was cool, and they had a lot of respect for each other, and they just enjoyed being friends, and making music together was secondary, but they had a lot of fun doing it, so they made it a priority. So we have a beer called Cowboy Singer, titled after the song my dad and Waylon wrote together, that is being released in Nashville this week. It's going to be, it's going to start rolling out to a few bars. Cowboy Singer, lager from Peaceful Side Brewery in East Tennessee. It's beautiful. There's always room for one more. Cowboy Singer.